Hi, everyone. I'm Katey Rich. This is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. We are releasing the podcast a day early this week, and you can probably guess why. Tuesday is Election Day in the United States. Everyone is more than a little preoccupied, I would say, even those of us who are supposed to be deep in award season. And we are, we promise. So for the past few weeks of the podcast, you've heard me talk about how the outcome of the election is definitely going to impact the mood of this year's Oscar race. But today we're going to dive deep on really what that might look like and how this has always happened in some way, even if it's hard to see in the past. So joining me to talk about all of that is a returning guest and the author of the Considerations column for Filmmaker Magazine, Tyler Coates. Hey, Tyler.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being willing to jump on the grenade of politics and the election, which I think a lot of us just wanted to ignore at this point.
I mean, why? Why would you? It's so fun. It's really fun. Campaigning.
So fun. Vibes are great right now, everywhere. Yeah. So, Tyler, after we talk about the state of the world and also the Gotham Awards, we're going to get into that a bit. I've got really the ideal palate cleanser interview. I got to talk to June Squibb. She's the star of the summer's huge breakout hit, honestly, Thelma. And at 94 years old, she could become the oldest ever Best Actress acting nominee. And she definitely deserves it. Tyler, can you believe that June Squibb has been alive for almost the entire time that the Oscars have existed?
Yes. You know, I got to interview her last weekend. I did a Q&A with her and Josh Margolin, the director. And she was so impressive. She was so...
Oh, my God.
I mean, talking about doing her own stunts, she was like, I was a dancer. I've used my body for my entire life. It's just like...
I know.
She's in the original production of Gypsy.
Yeah,
That's
you know,
June
the thing
Squibb.
that I wanted to ask her that like might be none of my business, but it's like, what are your tips? Like, other than like being a Broadway dancer for 40 years, how can I do this and be as spry as you are in 94? She's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And like, you know, 10 years ago, got her first Oscar nomination at 84. Her first movie, she was 61.
I know.
That's like, I mean, dreams don't have deadlines, as Bridget Everett would say.
There you go. So more from June Squibb at the end of this episode. And then, Tyler, before we get into the election and politics and all that, we should talk about the Gotham Awards.
Yeah.
They announced their nominations last week as people are hearing this, so they're a little bit in the past. They are weirdly early, like it's not just you, it's early to be talking about awards nominations. And I wrote in the newsletter last week that these awards are voted on by like literal like 5 people in each category. So it's the tiniest possible sample size. But I do think that in a year that's kind of wide open like this, like they can create momentum in a way that can be relevant. Do you agree with me that there's like some relevance to be gotten here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, I think the last time I was here, kind of at the beginning of the season, far back as August was, September, I don't remember. But, you know, I was talking about something that I think is really interesting kind of in the last few years is this divide between like the Hollywood studio blockbusters and like the indie kind of more art house Oscar bait kind of stuff. And so, you know, I think that's where the Gothams comes in for the latter. I mean, the selections were smaller in size for Best Picture. It was Anora, A Different Man, Challengers, Nickel Boys, and gosh, there's a fifth one.
A Baby Girl, which
oh my God.
Which is like barely screened at this point. That's kind of one of the ones where you're like, okay, they're really calling their shot. But Challengers is interesting, right? Because it's pretty expensive by the traditional Gotham standards.
Yeah, I mean, much bigger stars, I would say, you know, in front of and behind the camera. And obviously, well, I mean, 2 Amazon productions, really. Amazon MGM, excuse me. Also with...
We'll have more to say about the Amazon business in a little bit, I think.
I appreciate, again, you know, it is, as you said, kind of these small committees that select their nominations, but I kind of love that they kind of stick to their guns and really focus on more of the indie stuff, more of the kind of auteur-driven filmmaking. And, you know, I think for something like Baby Girl and A Different Man, I think it could elevate certainly those 2 lead performances, because I think that those are what people are paying attention to. But maybe, you know, we could see those kind of break out and, I don't know, maybe screenplay, director. Well, I don't know. Like, it could be interesting. I mean, again, like it's all helpful. It's all a boost.
Yeah, I mean, I think Honora becomes kind of the big takeaway by default because it got so many nominations, but we expected that.
Yeah.
Like, that as a critical darling has made perfect sense. Same with Nickel Boys. Like, we kind of knew that they were going to ride hard for it, but this is like proof that you can actually point to. So then it's like okay, well, there's the ones that we like knew they would do. And then there's the like 2 acting nominations for I Saw the TV Glow. And like, do you assign Oscar buzz to that? Maybe not. But it's a fine line in there, which is where maybe you don't read too much into any of this, but it kind of gives you something to hold on to at least.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like to think of every award season as sort of like a cohort, like a class of films and filmmakers, and that's sort of what the AFI luncheon kind of embraces it. It's like, this is your yearbook, basically.
Yeah.
You know? So I think that like, I like the idea of an award season, a space for both Wicked and I Saw the TV Glow. You know, I think that's great. I think it's a great vision of what cinema can be, if I could, you know, be kind of lofty and ascribe meaning to things that
I think you absolutely should.
Yeah.
One more thing I will say on the Gotham's front. So they have gender neutral awards acting categories of just 10 lead and 10 supporting. But I do think that when you look at the lead performance nominees for this, it just shows you like how Best Actress is just like sweeping the floor with Best Actor right now.
Yeah.
Like there are so many more. I mean, Coleman Domingo, Adrian Brody are in there nominated for lead performance. I think they're both very much in the mix for the Oscars. But then for the actresses, like of the major Oscar contenders, Marianne Jean-Baptiste, Nicole Kidman, Mikey Madison, Demi Moore, and Saoirse Ronan in the very small The Outrun, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
Like, they are formidable.
Yes.
So congratulations to Best Actress.
And it's hard to imagine that there are contenders outside of that group, because there are.
Really?
I mean,
oh, God. I see what you mean. Yes, there's so many.
There are so many. I mean, Best Actress, I think. I mean, as a gay man, I feel like that's the one category that is the most important, always, perennially. But, you know, every year it's sort of like, I don't see it yet being down between 2 people, which I think maybe by February we'll get there.
Oh, God. Yeah. No. So we're going to talk about that, about the wide openness of all of this. And maybe that does pivot us a little bit to the pre-election vibes we're trying to get at here. We're not going to try to predict how this election's going to turn out, both because this episode's coming out on Monday before, and like, I don't know how this is going to go. Do you have like a secret that you know how it's going to go? You want to tell me?
Well, I can't, obviously. I can't tell you my deep state secrets, but no, I don't. I have no clue. I wish I could have a lobotomy until maybe January just to bypass it, but
I have asked to be hit in the head with a hammer, and no one takes me up on it yet.
Well, you've got Oscar predictions to do. We need you, Katey.
I know. I'm just going to go watch all of the nominated or all of the shortlisted docs, and then
there you go.
Take myself out of reality. So anyway, like the theory I was going to throw out about this race is like, and I think there is something to this, that this race is so wide open right now, partly because the election is out there and no one has the energy to anoint a front runner yet. Everyone is too busy focusing on other stuff. Like, do you think there's something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely that. I think in the last few years, we've had pretty much like, at least by November 1st, all the movies are out. I would say this is the first, maybe since 2019, when like 1917 and Cats, let's don't forget Cats, were very, very like last minute additions, like screenings were like, I think 1917 I screened like the day after Thanksgiving. Which is rare, which this is happening this year. You know, I still haven't seen Wicked. I know you haven't seen Wicked. I haven't seen Gladiator yet. Nosferatu.
Gladiator's at least kind of peeped its head out for some people. Yeah. I did get to see Gladiator. Right, I won't rub it in too much.
Nosferatu screens, I think, November 7th in LA and New York. A Complete Unknown, I've been told, is still unfinished. So who knows where that is. Presumably coming before Christmas. And those are big contenders. I mean, we still kind of have to wait around and see how they shake things up, which last year we didn't have to do that because we had Barbenheimer kind of setting the pace in July. So it is kind of a weird year. I mean, especially for me, I think this is the first year that I've been like deep in like awards coverage where I had to wait around and there could be like a December surprise, basically.
Yeah. Do you like that aspect of it? Like, I think like kind of the stereotype of awards pundits is like, we want to all pretend like we know everything as soon as we leave Toronto. But like, I kind of like not knowing anything, but maybe not everybody does.
I mean, I do and I don't. I think the Virgo type A person in me who wants to plan, that's why I like predictions, because I like to come up with a plan. But you can't do that. And I think I think this year it's interesting because I think that, and I'm not gonna be the person to point out like kind of the red flag about every single contender right now, but I do think every contender has like one thing that other people can kind of latch on as like a negative. So I'm kind of curious if it's gonna be like an old days like Scott Rudin, Weinstein, like mudslinging type of stuff, because there is, you know, as we've all been saying, there is no front runner. It's kind of anyone's game. And so I think this is where we can see some actually campaigning happen and maybe some negative campaigning. I don't know. I've never experienced that sort of season.
Yeah.
I've only been, you know, way off as a spectator. So I don't know. That's sort of like the vibe I'm getting. I mean, look, the mood, generally speaking, is a little off. The vibes are dark. And I don't know if that's how it's going to affect Oscar campaigning, is that, you know, people are going to take out a lot of like pent up energy and just throw it at their projects or throw it at other projects in different ways. That's sort of my low-key prediction about, like, just the general vibes moving forward.
I think that pent-up energy is exactly what I've been kind of bracing for. And, like, because we don't know what the, like, vibe after the election is going to be, but whatever it is, everyone's going to feel a need to put it out there. And that was such a defining factor of the 2016 race, though it was kind of hard to see in real time. I wonder if we'll, like, be more prepared for the results of that this time around. But I also don't know, like, social media has changed since then. Like, the way that we process narratives and get into these things, like, it's more fractured than it was back then. Like, we thought that the end of, like, monoculture had happened then, and now it's really happened. So, like, how do you get your energy out on a film? How does, like, you know, a hashtag campaign affect something now when, like, things like that don't exist anymore? Like, it's kind of hard. I know it'll happen, but I don't know how, and that feels very strange.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I not to use my vocabulary words, but people do have, like, parasocial relationships to movies. Yeah. And, like, by the time early March comes around, people are losing their minds online, especially on Twitter. And, you know, again, most people on Twitter, they're not voting. You know, we have to remember that. Like,
for Oscars.
Yes, exactly.
Everyone on Twitter, vote for your presidential candidates.
Yes. But they're not going to vote for the Oscars, and, like, they just have opinions, which I respect. But, like, that's, like, when you get closer to the actual ceremony, that's, like, there's an ugliness that kind of comes out. Kind of. Yes. I mean, it's like Stan Twitter in a way. But, you know, I was thinking, I mean, in 2017, you know, obviously the infamous La La Land Moonlight switcheroo. But, you know, there was this weird narrative going into that Oscars as if, like, La La Land was Trump and Moonlight was Hillary Clinton. I don't know how that works, but but there was this weird, like, projection of like liberal grievances onto a movie about a white guy explaining jazz that became very derivative and stupid. So and I did not serve either movie in any way. No. And, you know, and then, you know, the ultimate mix up at the end also just cast a weird shadow on that.
It's crazy that we did both of, like, the Trump election and that mix up happened, like, completely, like, they had nothing to do with each other, but they happened like 4 months apart.
But, you
How
know,
did we survive after that?
Post-Trump, it did really feel like every single event that happened was, like, earth-shattering. Because I think that the election really just shook a lot of people out of their comfort zones, and just everything was a little off axis. So I don't see any way you can project Trump onto any of the films that are in contention this year, but I'm sure someone will figure it out. Don't underestimate
someone with a Letterboxd account finding a way to make this go crazy. Well, I was trying to go back, and because, like, I think knowing that the Oscars and politics go hand in hand is a really obvious thing. Like, movies win Best Picture because they reflect the times, but finding links between an election and the results of the Oscars, the way that Moonlight and La La Land is a lot harder. I think just because media was different. The thing that, like, I feel like had to have happened, but I cannot find evidence of, is that Gladiator winning right after Bush v. Gore is linked somehow. The idea that this, like, big kind of unifying, like, straight down the middle movie would win Best Picture after an election that crazy, and after one where, you know, George W. Bush is supposed to be the relatable everyman. Like, we were both alive then, but not as plugged in. Like, that had to have been there, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't remember. I mean, I was a senior in high school for Bush v. Gore, and then ultimately for Gladiator winning the Oscar. And I don't really remember, I guess I don't remember putting those pieces together I guess.
I don't think most people did,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like with the La La Land thing. Like, I think it took us a couple years to be like, wait a second, we tried to say that movie was Trump.
Right.
What was wrong with us?
Right, exactly.
It takes time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I mean, it is sort of, there was a period in that era, I think, because then a couple years later we had Lord of the Rings and Titanic, like 3 years before Gladiator. I mean, maybe Titanic kind of like shifted this idea of like the huge, big Hollywood production spectacle is like back and it's good again. And so, which is sort of where we are again. Like, you know, when we have Top Gun and Barbie getting nominated, we're sort of seeing kind of this cyclical thing happen. You know,
so it's more about, I mean, I guess that's the real answer is like everything is more about a lot of cultural factors and not just a single election. Moonlight and La La Land included.
Yeah, I mean, Moonlight is still a fascinating Best Picture win to me. You know, I think it is one that the least people saw, at least from an audience perspective, you know, a commercial audience. So like that is really fascinating that they like managed to win and it's an incredible win. But yeah, I don't know if that was necessarily a reaction, a liberal reaction maybe, and kind of the way that people responded in 2020 to George Floyd. I don't know. I mean, I think that certainly plays a role in voting and kind of maybe a little virtue signaling in a way. And I haven't really seen a movie like Moonlight be embraced in that way since. So maybe that...
Even though the Best Picture winners have gotten more daring and brave in a way that like Moonlight was such a surprise then, and now movies like that are much more likely to be competitive.
Yeah, I think
it's still kind of a high watermark.
Moonlight is still such a small, quiet drama, independent drama, and has kind of like a narrative gimmick to it, which I think helped... But yeah, I mean, I haven't seen, you know, a movie of that size win, unless we're considering like Nomadland, which is sort of like, I put an asterisk on because
Oscar year,
it's a weird Oscar year.
Not Nomadland's fault.
Yeah, no, of course not. That movie was deserving of it. But yeah, it's just like, and again, like that there's so many factors too, like when a movie just happens to be released, because that could have been a Dune year, you know? But it was pushed. So yeah, I don't know. I think it is... I don't know, like a weird, I don't want to get like spiritual or like too astrological about it.
Please do.
I think that there probably is like, you know, a general mood in the culture at large that kind of leads those conversations to like promote a film like Moonlight post-Trump. But then, you know, like a couple years later, you get Green Book, which sort of feels like the opposite,
I know.
You know?
Yeah.
So, and Green Book beating Black Panther, which is still surprising to me. So,
like, none of this ever happens in a straight line.
No.
Like, we've learned from everything,
right.
I guess.
And, you know, I mean, you've talked about this. I've talked about it too, but this year there's going to be no female directors in Best Director, I think. Right. I mean,
I think that too, but I had the idea that The Substance is doing really well.
I mean,
it is making a ton of money.
Yeah, The Substance is, and I think, a viable contender.
Wondering if, like, you know, I think there's a lot of just like really big, you know, movies directed by men that you would imagine being there first. But like, I did wonder, like, whatever election vibes are coming our way, if that idea that there won't be a female director like gains a foothold, like, would that mean, I want to say her name wrong, Coralie Farjah?
Yeah,
don't
sure, yeah.
Coralie Farjah, the director of The Substance, like, you know, that movie is a pretty bold directorial vision.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really kind of just like in the last couple of days starting to think like, that might actually happen.
Well, you know, I just wrote this week in Considerations, the newsletter. It'll be on the filmmaker website on Friday, but I just wrote,
plug.
Thank you.
Go for it.
You know, it's spooky season. Today's Halloween. We're recording this. So I was like, it's, you know, we're getting 2 Halloween weekends. So I figured, why not
there we go.
just dive into horror? But, you know, to talk about The Substance, I think you're right. I think that I think running it as a comedy at Golden Globes will help it, which I usually don't care about the Golden Globes. I don't believe they're really that viable anymore. But I do think it's smart because it follows like the Get Out strategy, which Get Out ran as a comedy. I think if you like kind of hone in on the satire, that helps the screenplay. Obviously, it kind of gets people over the squeamishness of what is in the movie, which is terrifying and gross.
Yeah.
And then it also helps Demi Moore. I think I think Demi Moore can kind of follow the Michelle Yeoh, Jamie Lee Curtis track by having like being, you know, a beloved industry icon who's never been nominated and doing a complete out of left field, genre bending, shocking movie that's hard to explain. I think that like she has a lot of traction there for that reason. And I think Corley too. And I think also we're obviously talking about this through kind of an American lens with the election, but I think Europeans are like really swaying the vote these days. So, maybe the U.S. election has nothing to do with the Oscars anymore because there's so many international voters who just don't care in the same way. I don't know.
Bless them. I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
It is funny that you have Amélie Perez, which is the actual French submission, and then The Substance. Like, we have like two like French movies that are neither of them all that French on the surface. Like, neither of them is set in France.
But also very
that could be
French.
Really major there.
They're very French.
Yeah, I should have looked closely at the Globes categories before jumping into this. But talking about how Best Actress is so loaded, like I feel like you could have 5 incredible Best Actress drama or 6. Do we do
We're
6
now?
now? Oh my god!
So basically,
so
if you're in the race, you're going to get nominated for a Golden Globe at this point.
But I don't think they're like, is Anora competing as a comedy at the Golden Globes?
Anora's a comedy.
Okay, so and Amélie Perez is also a comedy.
Yeah, musical or comedy.
And Challengers is a musical or comedy, and The Substance. Like, there's 4 major actors. I guess I'm assuming Thelma will be in there for June Squibb as a comedy.
Yeah.
Like, that's, it just like stacks up so quickly. So like, great. Bring on more competition there.
Yeah. It's kind of weird that we have more, musicals counting as comedy is also kind of a weird genre classification. But, we do have technically, I guess according to these studios and how they submitted, we have more comic actress performances than drama, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because really, drama, I would say it's like Saoirse Ronan for The Outrun and Angelina Jolie for Maria.
And Baby Girl, I assume is competing as a drama also for Nicole Kidman. But Hard Truths, is that competing as a comedy at the Golden Globes?
God, it must be. I think it's a drama.
It's really funny.
Yeah. But it's a darker.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to check.
Yeah. Well, anyway. So like the Golden Globes, but again, to bring it back to the election, remembering the Golden Globes happen in early January. It will be like the first award show after the election.
Like
whatever
right before
turns out.
the inauguration, basically.
Yeah. And like that was where Meryl Streep had that speech in 2017 where like everyone like leapt. I remember mass pandemonium. It was probably calmer than that. Yeah. But there will be the vibes at the Golden Globes might be even more interesting than the Oscars in terms of whatever we're about to experience. You
may actually hear some commentary. But again, as I mentioned to you as we were talking about doing this episode, what I learned last year from watching The Zone of Interest make its way to the Oscars is how little political conversation happens around movies where there is so much to talk about. Yeah. And, I was honestly very surprised when that got the Best Picture nomination. I was like, sure, obviously I thought international was a lock, but Best Picture, I was like, I don't know. I feel like it's still too art house. It's still going to go over people's heads.
You were not the only one. Yeah.
And then when Jonathan Glazer gave his speech and there was the backlash immediately, I was like, oh, it did go over people's heads. So, and like, I realized that like also he had to save that speech for the Oscar night, which is like, I get it, but like, it's frustrating when you have a movie that has such a message that you want to get across and you have to like basically keep your lips tight until you actually get the final award before you can actually say what's on your mind. So I don't know. I don't know how that's gonna, the unrest across the world is going to go into the Oscars, because then of course, that's where the international voters kind of come into play. So I don't know.
Well, that's what I've been thinking about Conclave a lot in those terms lately, where it's like a movie that's explicitly about an election. And like, I think it has ideas. I really like Conclave a lot, but it's not like Zone of Interest where it's trying to be like, here's the state of the world. Right. Here's what we are doing here. And I like, again, depending on what happens over the course of November, like a movie about an election, about trying to find the right person to lead the world, as as seen in the world of Conclave, could have a lot of power, especially because it's kind of universal. Like it's not going to, there's nothing to go over anybody's head. Right. Everyone can grab onto it the way they want to.
Yeah, I guess my thing was that I'm just kind of curious when people are going to watch it. Like, I think if you're watching it this weekend, you're going to feel like you're insane, and you're like you're like, oh, wow, everything that when I saw it in September, I was like, oh, so everything that the Democrats talked about around Joe Biden dropping out, like we're watching right now. This is great. I was like, okay, this movie comes out, 2 weeks before the election. And I think if you see it in that sweet spot, you're going to feel that. I wonder if the tone of, I mean, if like you watching that after the U.S. election, however it goes, if it goes badly, depending on where you fall, if it's going to like hit different, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I think it's possible. I mean, I think that's I think what's so interesting about an election year is that like what you watch in September could feel drastically different by the time you see it again in December.
Yep. That has been my theory on Gladiator 2 as well, which they screened really widely for critics or for not critics, for other press, pretty early, like earlier than you usually would. And I did wonder, like, not to spoil too much of Gladiator 2, but there are parts of it where like you can see in a certain political context it playing differently. So I wonder if they're like, we're going to get this in front of people before the election. We're going to get their feelings on it. And then we'll see how things go. But like, at least we got some read without the context of the election behind it. Before we wrap this up, I do feel like we should dive right into current events, because you had pointed out to me that the kind of kerfuffle around Jeff Bezos on the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, noted op-ed writer now, may have an impact on the fact that Amazon has awards contenders. And as with anything, it's so hard to know how long a news cycle will last and like what will matter in March. Like you can probably guess a lot of this wouldn't, but it is an interesting moment for companies run by billionaires who want to put their thumb on the scale. And I think you have a point that this might linger for at least in some way after this.
Yeah, you know, I can't really tell, honestly, because I think, you know, obviously Jeff Bezos really screwed over the Washington Post. Let's just say it that way. I mean, they lost over 200,000 subscribers, which is a major hit for them. How many people canceled their Prime memberships, though? Which is like what's really going to hit.
Maybe what they actually care about.
I mean, I did not. Unfortunately, I have to keep it because I have to watch movies, and like that's just you know, I wish I could boycott a streamer out of like spite, but I can't. So, but yeah, I mean, I've been wondering about that. I don't think anyone, I think if it happens, it'll be a very silent thing, in which way we won't be able to like actually identify it, whether or not it actually happened, because I don't think anyone, because again, like it's Amazon MGM Studios. MGM is 100 years old, one of the most important studios in cinema history. And I don't think anyone in their right mind in Hollywood is going to call for anything bad to happen, because that's
or
career
like punish
suicide.
Nickel Boys.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Nickel Boys could not have less to do with Jeff Bezos, even though it's being released by his company.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of the nature of the beast. I mean, like the talent and the filmmakers don't necessarily choose who owns their studio, obviously. And they barely have a choice in what studio releases them. So
they're lucky to get any studio to release them at this point.
So I don't know. I think it's an interesting question, which is why I posted it. I don't have a quick answer for it. But I think it's just something we'll have to kind of wait and see, and maybe like just kind of like do anecdotal conversation about it, and just to see how people feel. Which is the hard part of predicting any of this, is because there's no way to poll the way you would in a real election. It's just like, you know, there are 10,000 Academy members. I think we all know a handful, but none of us obviously probably did great in stats if we think that that's, you know, a way to figure out the tenor of the entire voting body from like a few people that we know in various branches. So that's why it's so hard, I think. There's no way of really knowing where it moves until you start seeing the guilds start selecting, because that's where you actually have overlap in voting bodies.
January, we have... actually, no, I guess in December is when some of those are coming out. We got a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nominations are certainly helpful. They start kind of giving you an idea. And then, of course, especially for craft, that's sort of how I would handle crafts. It's like you look at what the guilds are selecting against the short list, and then you can sort of
start piecing it together.
Basically extracting titles is how it works to me. But yeah, I mean, honestly, you know, that's why I just really have an allergy to predictions, despite my broken brain that only wants to do it. Like, I am trying my hardest not to publish what I think is going to happen, because I don't want to look like a dummy.
there's always going to be something.
I know. That's the thing. There's always a surprise. There's always a surprise. And again, like, I think the Academy voting base is growing in ways that is really hard to identify how subjective tastes will go. So, yeah.
A big question to wrap us up. Like, I think, we've acknowledged that the Oscars and politics are kind of inextricably linked. They're always going to be dependent on the mood of people. Moonlight was a really good winner to come out of kind of the chaos after 2016. Like, as a net whole, like, do you think it's a good thing that Oscar votes really depend on the state of the world, maybe even more so than the quality of the movies that are being put up there?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you look back at Best Picture winners, how many are you like, yeah, that's the one? That's the one that they got it right that year. It's very rare. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's...
I don't know. Over the course of history, like...
There are a handful
like
of
40%.
really... Yeah, but that's a good chunk. But, there are definitely years where you're just like, what the hell happened there?
And we'll never know which... Like, I would love for there to be a unifying theory of what happened in every single year of Oscars campaigns. And there's just some years you're never going to know it for.
No.
And we have to live in the mystery.
And again, like, sometimes it's just like maybe more people worked at the studio that voted that year. I mean, truly, because there are people who are like, every strategist is going to vote for like their top movie. Every publicist who's in the Academy. But yeah, I mean, if you're a studio executive who works at Universal, you're going to vote for Wicked down the line, I think. Yeah. Because...
Well, like, when you're talking about MGM, like, back in the days when, like, the movies were nominated by studio, not by producer, like, 1950, like, 2 of the nominees are from MGM. Like, it's, for, 3 or 4 of them in some other years. So, yeah, you're going to... Everyone who's on the payroll is going to vote for their movie.
Yeah, but, because you were looking at some historical years, I pulled up 1969 because I was like, what happened after 1968, which was like, I felt like until I became an adult was the craziest year in American history. Now it's just like every year is 1968 all over again. But the winner in 1969 was Oliver. And Barbara Streisand won for Funny Girl. So, I mean, we did have The Lion in Winter in there, which is sort of like political. And then Ruth Gordon won for Rosemary's Baby. So you have like, you're starting to get that like Hollywood paranoia kind of getting into the mainstream. And then I think that's when it sort of kicks off into like the Academy embracing the counterculture a little bit more.
But that also happens so slowly, as you're saying. Like, that's something we associate with the 70s, and it comes in that year. And like Mark Harris's book about the 68 race is like completely fascinating to like get at how all that's happened. So anytime like you're trying to be like, well, this happened 3 months earlier, so it impacted in this way. Like, it's almost always false.
Right.
But it's there on some level.
Yeah.
And that's what
I mean, I
trying to figure out.
I think like the most infamous winner of our kind of like generation of like, watching all this stuff, I would say is Crash. And that
I didn't know
like,
if you were going to say Green Book or Crash. Crash is for the elder millennials.
Yeah. We're elder millennials still wearing Brat Green in November. But yeah, I mean, what was Crash a response to? Like the Bush years as a whole? I don't know. I mean, a response
to Los Angeles wanting to feel special. Well, I mean,
not wanting to vote for the gay movie. I don't know. I mean,
I think that feels like the real part of it, right? Like that's the year that Bush passes the Defense of Marriage Act, like that year, the year after. Like it's all right in the middle of there, which is like crazy to think that less than a decade later gay marriage is legal around the country, but that's where things were back then.
Yeah, back then in 2005, which feels like it's when I graduated from college, so Jesus. It's disgusting.
Well, Tyler, thank you so much for diving deep into all of this with me. I hope that we stay sane through whatever election season has in store, and that we can get back to talking about who's going to win Best Actress, which I think we would both
the most important election of our lifetime. Who between Mikey Madison and everyone else, as far as I'm concerned,
and June Squibb and Demi Moore and Saoirse Ronan, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, and then after that, I'll be back with my conversation with June Squibb. Now let's hear my conversation with June Squibb, the star of this summer's very genuine breakout hit, Thelma. Chances are you first noticed her in the 2014 Alexander Payne film Nebraska, which earned her her first Oscar nomination at the age of 84. But June has had a long career that stretches back to Broadway in the 1950s, where she was part of the original production of Gypsy, among other shows. Since that Oscar nomination for Nebraska, though, she's really become an icon. And as she told me in our conversation, it means she's stopped having to audition for roles, which is maybe more of a double-edged sword than you might think. We talked about her physical prep for the challenges of her role in Thelma, in which she plays a Los Angeles grandmother who goes on a revenge mission when she gets had by some scammers. And we also talked about her belief in the power of intergenerational friendships, like the one she has with her former co-star Chris Colfer and also her Thelma co-star Fred Heschinger, who you'll also see in a couple weeks in Gladiator 2. June makes the process of becoming a top-billed movie star in your 90s sound really simple and really fun. So hear it all in my conversation with Thelma star June Squibb. So I've been reading and listening to other interviews that you did about Thelma, and you said that you read the script and you immediately understood who this character was. But I don't think you said whether that was because you felt like she was like you in any way. Are you like Thelma in any way, and is that why you recognized her?
Yeah, I think I am like Thelma in a lot of ways. I think her determination and her thing of I can do it, I will do it. I have that very much to my detriment sometimes because I keep saying, of course I could do that when I should never have said that. But I do recognize that sort of grit, and the thing of I can do anything. I recognize that very much in her.
Do you think that you are, it feels like she's very trusting at the beginning of this movie, and that's sort of how she gets in all this trouble. Do you share that with her, or do you have a little bit more skepticism?
I tend to believe, I've always done that. I tend to believe people when they tell me something, yeah.
Now, how does that work with a career in Hollywood when people famously never tell you what they actually mean?
Well, I guess it all goes through my agent, and they tell me pretty much everything.
Okay. Do you feel like if you come to people and you believe the best in them, that they give you the best back? Is there an optimism in that?
Yeah, I think so. I do feel on a set, and I think that the set is so much driven by the head, and that's usually your director, sometimes the star, but mostly the director. And for Thelma, Josh was wonderful, and he was the leader.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference because that sets the tone of, what the set is going to be.
I wanted to ask about Josh because I know that Beanie Feldstein introduced you, so you knew that, she trusted him, so therefore he's someone worth meeting. But you have to build trust with a director, especially when you're the star. So how did that go with Josh? How did you build that trust together?
Well, we spent some time together, not a lot, though, because there was a period after I said yes, then they finished all of the monetary needs and everything and planning and, making out their schedules and all of this. So there was a period there where we didn't really deal with each other. And then as it came closer, we did. And he introduced me to Fred and he introduced me to Richard. He brought both of them at different times to my apartment for lunch.
Was that something where he wanted to make sure that you got along with them before he gave them the role?
Yeah, he wanted us to meet before we started shooting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has that happened to you before where you've had the chance to really build that chemistry with your co-stars?
Well, yeah, because I've had rehearsal periods in some films. Like The Humans had a tremendous rehearsal period.
Of course.
So you begin to know before you shoot these people and you begin to get your trust going in them.
So with Josh, he had made a short film. So this is really the first time he'd made a movie. And I know that you're working on Scarlett Johansson's first movie as well. Is there something about first-time directors that that suits you?
No, it's always the script.
Sure.
And both scripts are really extraordinary, I think, in terms of film use. And so I worked with so many first-time directors. Sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's a lot of fun. So you hit or miss.
Do you feel like you get to day 3 or 4 on set and you know whether or not they know what they're doing, that you know you've made it?
I think you find out very soon. I think you know very soon. Yeah.
How do you get through the rest of a shoot when you realize you've maybe not made the right choice?
Well, I have been trained basically for theater, but it shifts over to film. If you need directing, you can do your own. And not, I train in terms of, I've had 1 or 2 teachers both talk about that.
Yeah.
Because they always say there will come a time when you have a director that is not working and it doesn't work for you, and you have to do your own planning, your own work, know what you think should be done.
Yeah.
So I think that has happened. Yeah, that has happened.
Well, and I know Josh was not a director who didn't know what he was doing, but I think he said that he really deferred to you on a lot of things about depicting an older character, knowing that he's not in his 90s. So how did that work for you in, not having to overrule Josh, but working with him and knowing this character in a way that he didn't?
I think it worked wonderfully. I think it's one of the most relaxed sets I've ever been on in my life, and I enjoyed it tremendously. And I think the film shows that. I mean, I don't think that without Josh that you would have Fred and I, or you would have Richard and I.
Yeah.
And I think both relationships are pictured beautifully in the film. I mean, I think that we've done our work on both relationships.
Yeah.
And I think that all stems from Josh still.
What does it mean for a set to be relaxed? Just that no one feels like they're running out of time?
You're not pressured. There's no anger, which you sometimes find upset. There's no push. People aren't pushing you. They feel they have time.
Yeah.
It's everything. It just goes at a nice pace. It's not slow. I don't mean that, but it's not pushed. Everybody's not pushed into going faster or doing something that they're not comfortable with.
How does that work with some of those more complicated? I mean, all those sequences on the scooter feel to me like they're so complicated. I know you're there doing your own stunts. Like, how does the director set the tone for making something fairly, elaborate like that work and make you feel like you're doing your best?
Well, I wanted to do the scooter work. When I read the script, I thought this sounded wonderful. I couldn't wait to get on the scooter. But they were very leery of me on the scooter. So I had to show them that I could drive the scooter and be comfortable on the scooter, be safe on the scooter. And I did, and then they let me go, kind of. And I don't know, every time we got on that scooter, it just worked. It never was frightening. And we just did what we had to do on it. And they kept kidding me because I got so I could stop on a dime. I was so good at stopping. And that was hard on that scooter.
Well, I think you've said that when you barge into Richard Roundtree that he didn't know that you were going to do that. You kind of took the moment and got his...
he didn't. He didn't. That was completely my idea at the time, because they told me, just go up to him, stop, and we'll do it later. The stunt people will do it. I thought, well, this is silly, so I just did it. And he didn't know what I was doing. He didn't know I was going to run into him. And luckily they had the cameras going, because after I hit him and started my scooter off, I thought, well, I hope they're getting all this, because we did a ram, we got, and I pulled out and raced off, and they got it all.
Yeah.
So all of that was really us doing it.
Well, this has been, famously described as your first lead role. Is that the kind of thing you get to do when you're the lead that maybe when you're in a supporting role you can't?
No, I would have done the same thing if it was a supporting role. I just felt I could do it, so I did it. It was as simple as that.
So what did feel different being the lead then?
Well, with the lead role, you have more time in front of the camera, and I think that's basically it. And it made very little difference to me. I mean, everybody, the leading role, but it just was a bigger role, and I had more time in front of the camera. And you do sort of set the tone, and I just sort of go about my business, and I never think much about that.
That's interesting, setting the tone as an actor. You talk about the director, and that makes sense. But you're right that the lead actor, the first person,
the lead actor has to set a tone. Because Josh talks about that a lot, more than I realize. realized he talked about the fact that I had set a tone for a certain kind of work on the film.
And that's not something you were thinking about actively?
Not at all. Not at all. Mm-mm.
Had you noticed on other films that you've made where there was a lead actor who set a tone in a way that was, maybe you wanted to model yourself after, saying like, okay, that person did it right?
Oh, yeah. I've worked with some wonderful people. And I think that Jack Nicholson, I mean, oh, God, that was a joy to work with him. And he set the tone. And there was humor, but there was also, we did it exactly what the director wanted. And, he did the right thing, but he set the tone.
Yeah. Well, so it was after About Schmidt with Jack Nicholson that you moved to Los Angeles, right? That was the big shift.
Yes.
Because Thelma is such a Los Angeles movie, and I think people who live in LA really appreciate that. As a, relatively recent transplant to LA, is that something, was there like a hometown spirit to that you appreciated? Do you feel like a Los Angeles person now?
Because I live in the Valley.
Yeah.
And then we shot almost everything in the Valley. The opening apartment was in Brentwood, and that was his grandmother's real apartment.
Oh, wow.
Her condo. But other than that, it was all the locations were in the Valley.
Yeah.
And I'm a proud Valley person now. I've lived here for about almost 25 years now.
What was that transition like, though? After you'd been a lifelong New Yorker and Broadway person, was it a big deal to move to LA at that point?
Well, I had started coming out like 3 months at a time and working, really, and then going back to New York and then coming out. And that's why I finally got the apartment, because I realized I was spending more and more time out here. And so by the time I got the apartment and actually moved, and then I kept my New York apartment for about 6 years after that.
Yeah.
So then my son and I went back and cleaned out the apartment. So it was a process that took quite a while.
But it was really just
a
practical thing if you're going out and doing auditions.
Yes, very practical. And I kept getting more and more work out here. I was doing more out here than I was in New York.
Yeah.
So it just seemed the thing to do.
I feel like the thing that actors often say that, they love acting, but auditioning is what will grind you down. Coming out to LA and doing auditions like that, like, was that exhausting? Do you like that? I know you don't have to do it anymore, but at that point, were you ready to just jump in that way?
I was, because I was used to doing auditions.
Sure.
I was all over New York doing them. So here it just meant I was driving rather than taking a bus or, the bus really is what I used to take. Bus and taxi cabs in New York. But out here, I drove myself around, so I was driving all over the place.
So it was easier in some ways. You just get your parking validated, and you don't have to get a subway ticket.
It was the only way, because I couldn't take buses or get around that way.
Well, I think you said it was after Nebraska that you didn't have to audition anymore, that you moved. And so what?
It was after the Oscar nomination. That makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. So, I mean,
it just sort of happens after that.
Yeah. And you were so used to a certain way of working. So to have that change happen, what were you able to say no to that you hadn't been able to? How did things change for you and how you thought of your career after that?
I don't think it didn't. My decisions didn't change because I'd always kind of made my decision, especially in film, from the script. I think in theater, I did a lot more of whatever was there than in film. I don't know, maybe it's because film it was there and everybody could see it for years afterwards. But I always have made a yes or no decision in film on the script. The only big change was, of course, not auditioning and being offered roles. Yeah. Rather than auditioning for them.
So you were pretty choosy about anything that would go on film or television even before that.
I've always been, At the very beginning, I was not. I took absolutely anything that I was offered. But I think certainly by the time I came out here, I was turning things down.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like you've always been someone who, like, if you're not working, you're kind of looking for what the next job is. That there's not, sitting down quietly at home is never going to work for you.
No, it doesn't.
So I was going to ask about, you're talking about the stunts and all the, the work that you've done, the physicality of not even the scooter, but the bedrolls and kind of the tiptoeing through things. Did your background as a dancer fit into any of that? Do you feel like you carry that with you for doing physical work like that even now?
Yeah, I think your body has a memory of all that work. And I really think that it enables you to figure, your body figures these things out still. And I've been told that by like teachers, trainers who say that because of my all those years of dancing, that my body retains knowledge of all that.
Has there been a process of kind of learning like, okay, well, I can't tap dance the way I used to be able to, but I can do this with my body? Do you feel like you're always kind of learning new ways that you can express yourself?
I think I'm probably maybe past that.
Oh, that's fair.
No, I mean, I'm still walk. I still work. I still do everything. But like, I could not do much more, I don't think.
Sure. But
I think I'd probably hit it.
But what you're able to express in Thelma physically is still, even though there's not something to add to it, but what you're able to do with what you have is like, that's a learning process too, right? Of knowing what you can get across.
Yes, I'm finding out what you can do. Because I didn't know. I really did not know. When I said I could do a bedroll, I knew what it was, and I thought I could do it. And I did. I was able to do them.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I mean, there was no way I was assured of this.
And they let you take the gamble.
Yeah. They let me try.
Yeah. Is there anything you remember on making Thelma that was intimidating or that you felt like the biggest challenge of all of these?
I think those stairs. Going up those stairs.
Yeah.
Because we went to that house, and it was a house somebody owned, but it was so old and so used. And I looked at those stairs, and it just seemed insurmountable, But then we pared it down where I didn't walk the whole thing, of course. And so it became possible.
Yeah. So none of the acting stuff. Any challenges of the actual acting in this role? There's nothing that intimidates you there.
I think I understood her. I think I really understood her, and I really knew where I was going with her all the time.
Yeah. I think I read that you and Fred Heschinger still have dinner together since filming this movie. Oh,
yes. I adore him. He's one of my best friends now. He really is. Do you think that people underestimate how easy it is to make this kind of intergenerational friendships? I think we treat it as such a rarity, but I don't think it's actually as rare as it is. Like, why do more people not embrace that kind of friendship with people who are decades older or younger? I have another friend. I don't know if you remember Chris Colfer from Glee.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He's one of my closest friends. I did a Glee that he wrote and did the lead in. And we just sort of bonded. I don't know what. The same with Fred. And Chris now has been in my life about 10 years. Yeah. And he and his partner we have dinner every week or, a few weeks. And he's here for Christmas. He's here for my birthday. He's here for everything. He's part of the family.
Yeah. Yeah. And family, the way that you have the ability to create your own family throughout the course of your life, I think is something else that we underestimate, that you can add someone anytime you want.
It's wonderful. Yeah. It's so wonderful. I love it.
Yeah. Before we run out of time, I wanted to ask about your introduction to the Pixar stable, where it kind of seems like they keep finding ways to put you in there in some way. I guess that started with Soul. What is that? Do they just call you up and say, hey, we got something for you, come in for a day?
Yeah. It started with Toy Story 4.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And they called my agent. And it went on for about a year of them calling every so often saying, we're about where we want June, but not quite, in terms of their schedule,
of course.
Needing me. But I had said I would do it. I was eager to do the voiceover thing, and especially with them, and especially cartoons.
Yeah.
And so it finally worked, and I did that, and then I did Soul, and now I did Inside Out too.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever imagine that you do a voice in something like Inside Out 2 and it becomes one of the biggest movies of all time? What a wild thing to wrap your head around.
It's so wild. It is wild. And a little girl the other day came running up and recited Nostalgia's lines to me.
Really?
Yes, I'm serious.
So you get recognized for voice roles, even though
Right,
that's
I
not.
do.
Yeah, you think it's because I think you've said that you know your voice is distinctive, like you do. There is some
It's
power
very
to that.
distinctive,
Yeah.
and the other thing is it's publicized.
Yeah.
Because my name is used, when they're getting a list of the people in it, my
Sure.
name is, so people know. And I don't know, this one just took off, boy. Inside Out too. It's just amazing what has happened to that.
I know.
Yeah.
Thelma has been out for so long. You've been talking about it for so long. Are you getting used to having conversations like this and talking about your work and being the lead and face of this movie? Does that take adjusting to doing this?
Nah, it takes adjusting. I just said last night I couldn't sleep because I was thinking of some of the things we had said in an interview. And, you start thinking about your past, too.
Mm-hmm.
And you're asked about your past and, of course, the theater in New York and everything.
Yeah.
So, no, it's in that respect, I think it's made me look back on things much more than I ever would.
Well, it really makes me wish a lot of those theater roles were recorded somewhere. I know you said you took some that you maybe didn't want to be recorded, but I would like to see them. I feel like there's a lot we could be learning there.
It would be fun.
This show is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dan Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Tyler Coates. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you on our regularly scheduled day next week.